I would simply like to present the content of my book, run through it, and then maybe have a little bit of a discussion. The book is Architecture Against Architecture. Its tone is dark. I did not write this book out of joy. I wrote this book because I'm of the opinion that our profession is in serious trouble. And if we don't adjust course, if we don't change ourselves, if we don't critically look at ourselves, I think there is even a chance that the profession as we know it may not exist in 10 or 20 years' time. I would not like to see that happen. I mean, I always have to say this to people because when they read my books, they never believe me. But I love architecture, so let's get that out of the way. No cynicism at all, just good intentions. The book is a manifesto. It's actually a series of thoughts I had. I put them in the form of a manifesto because it is simply the most direct way of committing to what you are thinking at any moment. I think manifestos have a long history both in architecture and in politics. And I think it's probably manifestos are the moment architecture actually comes closest to being political. So I was very, very intrigued by the form, and I wanted to see if I could write it. So forgive some of the militant language. It is a style infiltration more than me, I think, to be honest. A 14-point manifesto to revolutionize architecture. The book is based on two premises, two a priori. Architecture in its current form has lost all credibility. That is as much autobiographic as it is about everybody else. And if architects wish to be relevant, they must reinvent their subject. So the book has two parts. It's split down the middle, two parts of 7 chapters. The long overdue reorganization of architects' practices themselves, because I think before you preach to the world what the world should be doing, you might sort of, put your own house in order. And the other one is a realignment of preoccupations to the pressing issues of the world at large. The first part is architects. We love architects. We love them to death. This is, well, we know who this is, being knighted by the former colonizer of his nation. The man stood for good architecture, he stood for emancipation. Some people even said he stood for the emancipation of women, of the emancipation of an entire continent. Until he didn't. I think we were on the bus together to some other conference when the news in the Financial Times transpired. So, we all know what happened or what according to him didn't happen, and that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is as soon as the impeccable reputation was tainted, so was everything else. It was like an avalanche, Museum in Harlem cuts ties with David Adjaye. Deeply troubled Africa Institute cancels his project. Liverpool Slavery Museum cuts ties. Manoa County Library parts ways with architect David Adjaye. Bedrock is evaluating the role in Cleveland. That means getting rid of him. This is American for firing. Rock star architect David Adjaye leaves Chicago project as sexual misconduct claim to rock the practice. If he hadn't, they probably would have done to him what he chose to do himself. So this is all very, very sad for the individual involved and for who is closely involved with the scandal. But what we tend to forget is that David Adjaye had an office. I think it was about 110 people at the time that all of this happened. And almost immediately after the accusations, half of the staff had to leave their job. And we're not talking about a court case where he is convicted of any wrongdoing. We're talking about an article in a newspaper that rightly or wrongly says he done something, and then the moment is unstoppable. And to me, this indicates, it's very nice to be famous. It's very nice to have audiences listen to you. But to me, this indicates the utter fragility of our industry. You build an oeuvre and a body of work on a reputation, you can lose it over a reputation. So in that sense, my first plea in the book is to end any and all focus on figureheads and make the fate of a business independent of whatever the figurehead does or doesn't do. We go on, more trouble. This is London, I think February 13 this year. This is more architects who were laid off for different reasons at the BIG office. And for me, it is another very interesting reminder. Architecture is work. It's not a vocation. It's not a calling. It's not a mission. In the end, it is work. Work. It always was. It always was. This is the drawing room of SOM, I think somewhere in the late 40s or early 50s. And work comes with workers' rights. That is a completely normal thing in any industry, whether it's aviation, whether it's machine workers, engineers. It's completely normal. It used to exist in architecture too. This is the Federation of Architects, Engineers, Chemists, and Technicians. Some great company, I would say, for architects to be in. That existed, I think, from 1934 till 1946, during the days of the Great Depression, when the majority of architects who lost their job in the private sector found employment in the federal architectural industry. They were government employers, therefore they had a union, which was called FIGT, and that was abolished in the late 40s, and there was a long time nothing until at a small New York firm, I think shortly after COVID, people decided to form a union. It was accepted by their boss. The union was the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. Again, interesting companies of other technical workers. And I think, and I may dread this position at some point given the role I have now, but I think we ought to welcome labor unions. I think it is quintessential that we recognize that the rights of employees and the rights of bosses, that their interests are ultimately the same. When we exploit our employees, our clients, no offense, will exploit us. They will come to expect it, and architecture will be engaged in a race to the bottom, which is something you do experience in commercial terms. So I think we simply have to grow up when a union presents itself, deal with it like an adult, and not say we're above this. This is not for us. We're a happy family. Don't we all like the job? And blah, 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 blah. So welcome labor unions. This is Chris, or it's Chris's successor. Chris heads a firm called Collective Architecture. In that firm, everybody is an architect. And even when they're not an architect, they have input on the work. Everybody has equal rights. Everybody does his own administration. Everybody is equal and equally appreciated. Whenever somebody leaves, they make him a leaving cake. This is meant to be funny. Devoted to the place standards. I mean, I remember, I think I saw the man in Yale holding a lecture, and I was deeply, deeply, deeply intrigued by, he spoke about the office. It seemed a kind of implausible version of heaven. I thought of my own office in somewhat different terms, to be honest. And then I was very curious about the work. And then this was the work. For me, it's very curious that apparently the price paid for having viciously fair conditions in an office is viciously mediocre work, almost the kind of work when all architects are equal, buildings look like there was no architect involved. So that was a bit of a dilemma. I was decidedly confused and did a little bit of historical research. Of course, there are older practices. There are very interesting practices that were all collectively owned. We know the work of Superstudio. There's the build work of House Rücker. There is Assemble, more contemporarily, who do interesting work that are collectively owned. But most interestingly, actually, the practice which we quintessentially, next to Frank Gehry, associate with signature architecture is actually also collectively owned. And it has been for a while, and neither the passing of its founder nor the transfer of the ownership into the hands of employees seems to have notably affected the signature. So that I find very curious. So the other thing is we must collectivize practice. All practice is effective immediately. Another topic. This is the Pritzker Prize ceremony. I think it's in the 1980s. This is not a Pritzker Prize winner. This is the daughter of Oscar Niemeyer, who showed up because Oscar Niemeyer at the time was in his 80s. He was too old, not fit to come and collect the prize. And everybody thought it would be the last prize he would receive before he would pass. But he went on to practice happily another 25 years. So this is very, very interesting. And then I thought, and no offense, I must say, the world's most famous architects are all older than the official retirement age in other professions. And it seems, like the old man who overstays his welcome and dictates global politics against the will of the entire world is not just merely a political phenomenon, you have it in architecture too. And I will make one promise, that when the time comes, I will leave and never to be heard of again. So, retire at 67, there we go. Another issue. This is a Zaha Hadid building in Beijing in China. This is a copy by an unknown Chinese firm in another Chinese city. The copy was finished before the original was finished. The Chinese architect, when quizzed on the infringement of copyright, had the following answer: we never meant to copy, we only meant to surpass. And therein lies the essence of architecture in my view. This was a copy of this. Similarly, when Philip Johnson visited Mises' office, he went back to his own office, and the glass house of Philip was finished long before the Farnsworth house. But the Farnsworth house was copied many times by others, time and again. And even the copy, meanwhile, has been copied. Copying is part of architectural evolution. Emulation is the core premise of any evolution. But now, recently, a major corporation has come on the scene and they want to patent and copyright the glass house. So they essentially want to copyright a cliche into private hands with the IP. And I find that deeply disconcerting, particularly because no architect generally has the legal muscle to sort of enforce this copyright, but Apple does. I mean, they have the lawyers, believe me, they will get it done. So abolish copyright, another thing. Particularly in the age of AI, I think it's kind of silly to insist on copyright. Now, many people are very pessimistic about AI. There's these apocalyptic predictions about how many people will lose their jobs through AI. I don't quite think the same thing. I think there's actually a wonderful opportunity in AI. You know, this was not drawn. This was not even rendered. This is the result of 3 words: residential, Palladio, Darth Vader. And this is what you get. You know, and an interesting fusion cooking with an absent master chef, let's say. And I mean, it's even beyond beautiful or ugly. I mean, I don't quite know what to think of it. You know, press C and you get columns. But interestingly, if you couple that kind of prompt craft to the developments in 3D printing, we may very well enter a situation where you can press B for building, and then it's mainly contractors who probably go out of business if they're not careful. I find it very interesting. You know, if architecture reflects the main industrial construction methods of its time, in the age of the, and therefore when it's industrial it has repetition and absence of ornament. With the current production techniques of AI generation and 3D printing, the same production need to eliminate ornament no longer exists. I mean, it's as much work to have an ornamented building as a non-ornament. So any ideological dimension of minimalism, modernism, abstraction is out of the window. I mean, the contemporary building, you can't, you know, is it ornament or is it a lack of maintenance? Even that is unclear. Is this ornament or cobweb? So I find also that highly intriguing. Maybe a chance for architecture to rid itself of style, because form is so abundant and so easy to create that we may focus on a more intellectual. So if this was the book of the 20th century, Ornament und Verbrechen, then its 21st century sequel ist einfach Ornament. Also, rely on AI for matters of taste, not too much else, but I mean, I would love to rid architecture of taste. entirely. Education. Education is in an interestingly alienated state. This is some of the courses taught at Ivy League American universities. Architecting hippocampal plasticity through spatial complexity. Gender-sensitive training for inclusive placemaking. I don't know what the word placemaking means, by the way, still don't. Blurring binaries and binding gender, gender cities and descent, gender spaces and modernity, queer aided as plants and placemaking, heritage from digital placemaking and healthy aging, inclusion and from minimalism to neurophenomenology. Sure. And then this kind of activism is accompanied by a weird sort of inactive state when you go to the average university campus, which is indulged in happily by students and their teachers. So here I think some real shock therapy is needed to bring academia around. I would in a way preach for a kind of a revolution where, you know, just as the Chinese intelligentsia was sent into the fields by Mao, we send university teachers and their students onto construction site for at least a year, for students to graduate, for teachers to qualify. I think it'll be a very, very good thing. And then this is my poem, go flourish in the field, no more and no less than 1 year. Put on your hard hat, wear your gilet jaune, lace up your steel-toe boots, accept the instructions you're given, quietly go about your work. Take pride in every brick that is laid, in every window installed, in every floor completed. Never forget who you are. Cherish the anger at those who reap the fruits of your labor. Nurture that anger. Let it fuel the courage to revolt against all who keep you in poverty. Arise, ye architects, from your slumber. So that's my introspection, and that's in a way how I would revise our own house. Then I'll be quick. The architecture, the next thing. The goal of all art is the building, the famous foundational quote of Walter Gropius for the Bauhaus. If you look at contemporary architecture state in mind, it seems as though the goal of all buildings is to be art. I don't think that's entirely a good thing. There's some of the quotes, how many times the word art features into quotes. These are the authors of the quotes. They are, without exception, architects. You never have architects do the thing in the other direction. I mean, no architect calls his art architecture. There is this nauseating drive among architects to regard themselves as artists. Is that a good thing? Because for once architecture enters the economy of art, it enters the same precarious nature of that economy. You know, artwork sold at record profits over and over again. Prime speculative material, because nobody knows the utility value of art. It has none. So therefore art is worth what we deem it's worth. There is no longer a relation to the object of use. Once buildings, which are objects of use, ultimately enter the same thing, you get this. Signore Filippo Johnson, 1983, and it's 2002, and then a resale at 1.4 billion, the AT&T building. So spectacular gains in money. But if you look at the economy of architecture, this is a very, very interesting thing. So this is architects, contractors, developers, real estate, banks. The developer reaps by far the most profit. Even the bank, for basically doing nothing, reaps more of a profit than the architect. And the architect has 0.3% of the revenue of the building made, and this directly, and this is why my point about unions is relevant earlier, this directly translates into the salaries of the junior architect who is employed, which is a rock bottom. You know, below the real estate, but even below bricklayers, plumbers, and all of that, the salaries of architects are negligible in comparison. So I would say free architecture from the concept of art for a while, you know, just an industry, a business. This is Le Corbusier. Then, this is Le Corbusier now. Most people would prefer the latter image to the former image, I think is safe to say. And the people who know what, here, you see, your choice best served. The people who know what people want these day and age, the curious thing, are generally middlemen. We call it property developers, investors, etc., etc. Many architects built for people who they don't know and who they are often, very often severed from. This is particularly the case in housing, which, caters to a theoretical demand, but it's the case also increasingly for schools, for libraries, cultural buildings, more cultural buildings, hospitals, prisons, and even churches are built by developers and investment companies today, with the architect in no direct contact. So essentially something as specific as the church becomes a speculative typology. There is a movement against this, particularly prevalent in South America, the so-called fiduciary trusts, where architects play a new role as a kind of impresario in fundraising with the users to jointly arrive as a project. Now, that obviously happens in the case of the private house, but it happens in larger buildings, in small apartment buildings. It currently in Rotterdam is being used to renovate offices into apartments. This is a crowd-funded tower in Bogota, also partly the initiative of architects. This is an entire city quarter in Almere, the Netherlands, built without developers, entirely by the people. And then I guess we could look at a future where somehow the middlemen are gone, where architects could align with users to, in a way, also strengthen their positions. I think talking to users will strengthen our positions because there is no arguing. As typologies are speculative, also the supposed functional demands become speculative, and you're left in no position. So, cut the middleman. This is Quilamba. This is a city of 1 million inhabitants in Angola, outside Luanda. It is entirely uninhabited. It's like a life-size model of one of Le Corbusier's vision. It's built by a Chinese contractor who had built so many empty ghost towns. Meanwhile, in China, you have this stuff, entire city quarters without inhabitants, where real estate still appreciates value because as long as you can sell it for more than you buy it, it doesn't matter. And if there's no wear and tear, the upward curve goes up even steeper, until it doesn't, because it's a pyramid game. In the fall of Evergrande, the largest property developer in the world at the time, the bankruptcy is related to that pyramid game that could no longer continue. That's the major property crisis in China, but of course we know this in Europe. The same thing happened in European countries after the financial crisis of 2008, which was also real estate related, in Spain, in Ireland. And the weird thing is, for me, this is the Netherlands with a plan to address a housing shortage with 10 new cities. Now we have a housing shortage when there is a massive vacancy also in the Netherlands. I think the vacancy in the city of Utrecht alone could accommodate the entire people looking for a home in that city. There is no need to build. We are building we have massively ambitious housing programs to deal with a housing shortage when there is massive vacancies. The housing shortage is not a shortage of substance, it's a shortage of affordable substance. That is what the real crux is. If you divide the amount of residential space in the Netherlands by the inhabitants of the country, you have something like 60 square meters per person, which is generous. So there is no need to build strictly in quantitative terms. It is the system and the value appreciation of real estate that drives it. So stop building until the existing stock runs out. It only seems to make common sense. But once you stop building, you also have to stop demolishing. You're going to need every bit of built substance you get. And some of the more weird loops, like the Schloss, as he was, demolished for the Palais de République, well, it could have been saved. The Palais de République demolished for the rebuild of the Schloss, while the Palais de République could have been saved, purely for ideological reason. The moment we need every building we can get our hands on, demolishing buildings for ideological reason ought to be a thing of the past. We simply have to accept all periods of history as beautiful. Even brutalism, even Plattenbau, even the 1960s, all of it, it's beautiful. So, pardon all things built. There's one problem with that. This is a curious example. It's a hospital in Chicago by Bertrand Goldberg. It's the Prentice Hospital. He spent his life working on hospitals until he had the perfect typology. And then, in his opinion, he had designed the ultimate typology. After that, other architects only needed to get his drawings, built the same thing, the perfect hospital. The hospital-to-end hospital design. It's only that when it was completed, medical science had progressed so much that the hospital was out of date. It was demolished less than 40 years after its conception. And that seems to be the curious case with buildings. If in the 16th century buildings lasted 300 years, in the 19th century 150 years, in the 20th century on average 100 years, in the middle of the 20th century 50 years, our own building lasted only 25 years, late 20th century. So it is not inconceivable that in the future the lifespan of a building will be negative. I mean, it's extrapolation, which means that you don't have to think what you construct. Well, of course you have to think what you will construct, but before you think how to construct it, you have to think of how you get rid of it, how you demolish it. So the ideal of architecture, of eternity in architecture, I think will have to be replaced by the ideal of provisional, getting rid of it without a trace, without waste, blah, 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 blah. So plan for obsolescence. Another subject, climate change. This is the Paris Climate Conference. You see, they've reached an agreement. The political leaders are very happy. They smile. But the larger their smile, somehow the bigger their contribution to CO2 emission is. It's a curious correlation. Every climate conference starts with an opening statement whereby they admit that the goals of the previous conference, unfortunately, had not been met. So let's assume that, in the 20th century, that the ultimate outcome of that is that the Earth will heat up much, much, much more than predicted. Even that, Al Gore's vision, the inconvenient truth from the beginning of the century, becomes a reality, that large parts of the Earth will be flooded. And now let coincidence dictate that the parts that will flood are precisely the parts where we have our largest conurbations, so that the future of architecture will equal the future of flood protection. Is that tenable? Or should we actually think of a carefully calculated surrender to the elements, whereby which, if we cannot avoid climate change, we coexist. We coexist. We coexist entire cities on the move. This is, for me, the most sustainable city ever built. It's a city for 200,000 people near to the Hajj in Mecca, where pilgrims come to pray and then they leave. It's a city entirely from tents. It was erected very quickly. It can entirely be removed without leaving a trace. So that's the other ones. Adapt to climate change. Stop claiming to mitigate it. Forget the term sustainability. Ban it. The last thing is about the end of history and last man, the book of Francis Fukuyama, written around the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union, for a world in which walls and antagonisms would be a thing of the past. But in the 21st century, we find that walls don't really go. In fact, they're being resurrected all over the place, and not just between the East and the West, but between everywhere and everywhere else. Fukuyama predicted a world that would be entirely blue, entirely democratic. The reality is that that never happened. Not all countries are liberal democracies. In fact, countries have a very interesting political life. There are three, this is simplistic, but there are three main categories. You have blue, that's electoral democracies. There you have elections, and you have to see who wins. Then you have red, that's non-democracies, which is a polite word for dictatorships. There you don't have elections. And there's an increasingly successful category, the yellow, pseudo-democracy, where you have elections, but you know the outcome in advance. Where elections are manipulated to such a degree that they become mere symbolic. And somehow one may wonder if that is the fate that the world is heading towards. In that sense, Hungary was a very encouraging thing. Had that not happened, I would have stood by this map, entirely without irony. The democratic political sphere that delegates its responsibilities to tech entrepreneur, or, the hereditary royal who has an interest in tech. One may wonder, how big is the difference? Are there good and bad places? If you look at the urbanism, this is his vision for Riyadh. This is actually the plan that's being drafted for Gaza, once Gaza turns into a resort in the hands of Jared Kushner. They're very, very similar. I mean, I can't tell the difference. They are both samples of very good taste, if you have the money. And that would be my last thing, and the most difficult thing. If morality can no longer be derived from where you work or for who you work, morality will only stem from what you do. What you do when you're in the position that you still have to do something. Morality will stem not from country, not from political allegiance, but from the ethic dimension of architecture itself, from the community we have, the colleagues we have, the critical nature we have towards each other. And we can then, and there's plenty to do, and increasingly so. Work not to have clients to work, would then be the adagium. So this is the 14 recommendations in the book, there in red and yellow. This is the cover of the book, and this is the new movement to enforce all of those points. Thank you very much.